Israel was created to be a theocracy, a nation led by God. It was a special relationship with God that was seen best in the place where God met with his people in the temple or the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle formed in the wilderness. You remember when Israel came over across dry land on the Red Sea, and Moses led them over, and they went into 40 years in the wilderness. It was in those 40 years that God formed a nation's relationship with God. That's where worship became a part of it, the tabernacle and all of the Ark of the Covenant. All of that was built out in the desert. And it kind of formed a pattern, a rhythm for the relationship that they had with the people. Now that tabernacle and the people moved throughout the desert. So they're on the move. They're living in tents, if you will. And God's fire would go before them at night and guard them. And then the cloud would lead them during the day. And there was a supernatural relationship with God. But when they would camp, this is really important to catch. Maybe you haven't caught it in the Old Testament before. They would stop, and at the center of all of Israel was the tabernacle, which represented God's presence. Now, I got a graphic I want to show you. For this is kind of a view of how they would camp. They would camp, and the tabernacle is in the middle. So that tabernacle, that little yellow box in the very middle, is where the Holy of Holies was. That's where the place of worship was. They would meet with God. But you will see around that, on the outside, boxes, Benjamin and Manasseh and Ephraim and Gad and Simeon and Reuben and Zebulun and Issachar, Judah and Naphtali and Asher and Dan. All of those are the tribes of Israel. Literally, when they would camp around the tabernacle. The center of Israel was literally the presence of God. So wherever they went, the most important thing for them was that God was at the center of what they did. This is very unique, by the way, even for those days. In the wilderness, the tent literally had the 12 tribes of Israel camped around that tabernacle. And it represented the presence of God. Worship and sacrifice and healing literally happened in the presence of God. Now, this is a little bit of a history lesson, but I want you to consider that the entirety of the Word of God is there for something. It's there to point us in a direction to consider our own ways. As God was building a relationship with people, He wanted those same people to put Himself at the center of their life, their daily life. And when they had God's presence, He promised that He would have healing, that He would have joy for them, that He would give them wisdom, that He would give them insight, and He would lead the people. Later on, when they got into the promised land and it was firmly established, the tabernacle moved into a temple, King Solomon built the first temple. And when he built that temple, it became a fixed place in Jerusalem. Now all of Israel, though it was spread out geographically, was to remember that God was at the center of the entire nation. And not just that God was at the center, worship of God and relationship to God was the most important thing. All of life was in rhythm with the Creator, and there was a connection to them, okay? And this is what happened because the presence of God was the most important thing to the nation of Israel.